My name is Oliver. Last summer, I was staying with my parents while my landlord fumigated my apartment. I could have stayed with my girlfriend Tiana, but I really hadn't seen my family in a long time. Besides, I knew that my little brother Benjamin was coming back home after his first year in college. I figured this would be a good opportunity to reconnect with all of them. I arrived in the afternoon and got to catch up with my parents. We talked for a couple hours, and I was happy to know that they seemed to be doing well. They asked about Tiana and about my job, and I asked them about their church friends. I tried to ask how Benjamin was doing, but I guess he hadn't talked to them that much in the past year either. He ghosted all of us, apparently, but I guess that's to be expected. It was his first year out of the house, after all. Eventually, Mom went to the kitchen to start dinner, and Dad and I watched football on TV. It was nice to be back home. It was relaxing. And then Benjamin arrived. He looked about the same as before, though he was wearing these weird spiky boots and a trench coat, something he never would have worn before. But there was something else about him, a darkness in his eyes. He'd changed in the last year, but I didn't know how. I'd find out soon enough. He hugged me and asked how I was doing. I told him about my job and my girlfriend Tiana. He seemed pretty supportive, but then he asked if he could see a photo of her. I showed him, and his expression instantly dropped. "You're dating her?" he asked. "What's wrong with that?" I asked. I didn't think that she was out of my league or anything. We were both pretty good-looking people, but then I realized that his negative response was because my girlfriend was black. For the next hour or so, there was an awkwardness between us. Even Dad noticed, and he never noticed anything. As we ate dinner, Mom suggested that Benjamin and I get out of the house and catch up over drinks or something. I wasn't sure that was a good idea, but Benjamin loved the idea. He said that he discovered this awesome bar that would help me learn a bit about myself. I didn't know what he meant by that. So after dinner, Benjamin and I got in his car and he drove me to this pretty shady area in town. He pulled up to this run-down bar that didn't even have a sign on the building. We had the only car in the parking lot. Everyone else had come here on motorcycle. "I don't know if I like this place," I said. "Trust me," he said. "You need to come here." I didn't want to let my brother down, so I followed him in. Right away, I knew I'd made a mistake. The place was filled with the sketchiest looking people, all men. Most of them had shaved heads. All of them had tattoos. Benjamin walked up to two burly guys at the bar and introduced me. They all said hello, but they looked at me like I was trespassing on their property. Then Benjamin asked me to take out my phone and show them my girlfriend's photo. I refused. I didn't know these people, and I certainly didn't want them to know anything about me or Tiana. Out of nowhere, Benjamin slammed me against the wall and stole my phone. He showed them the same photo as before, and all his buddies were horrified. They started lecturing me about the master race and bloodlines and the most horrific stuff. That's when I knew for sure this was a skinhead bar. Sometime last year, my brother had gotten infected by their twisted ideology. He was one of them now. Benjamin still held me against the wall so I could listen to his psycho friends without being able to escape. "Why did you bring me here?" I asked. "To knock some sense into you," he said. "Either you preserve our family name or break up with her, or—" "Dude, no!" I screamed. "I love her, man. You're insane." He did not like being called insane. He started screaming a bunch of racist nonsense that he picked up over the last year. It was disgusting. And when he ran out of words, he pulled a switchblade out of his pocket and held it up to my cheek. He said that if I didn't preserve our family line, whatever that meant, he'd cut me so that no woman would ever find me attractive again. The two guys behind him just watched and smiled. I could tell he meant business. I could also tell he was not going to listen to reason. The only thing I could do was run. So, I kicked him as hard as I could, right in the crotch. The knife fell out of his hand. All the other guys in the bar stared at me, but none of them moved. I raced out of there and ran all the way back to my parents' house because Benjamin had driven me there and I didn't have a ride. I knew that it was about a 20-minute walk, but because I was running the whole time, I got there in 10. As soon as I got inside, I ran to my parents in the kitchen and told them everything that happened. I must have sounded like a crazy person because the words just came out of me. When I finished, Mom and Dad stared at me for a long time. They looked at each other and then burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" I said. "He threatened me. He's a skinhead." My mom stepped closer and wrapped me in a big hug. "It's okay," she said. "Benjamin already told us what really happened." That's when Benjamin walked out of the other room. He'd gotten home before I did. I asked him what he said, and apparently he told our parents that I drank too much and started flirting with a girl who wasn't interested. When I got rejected, I started crying and ran out of the bar. "But that's not what happened at all," I screamed. It's okay," Mom said. "We promise not to tell your girlfriend." I kept trying to explain the truth, but no one would believe me. I guess the thought of me getting rejected seemed a whole lot more believable than my brother being a racist psychopath. Eventually, I stopped arguing with them and went to my room. I called Tiana and told her what happened, and of course, she believed me. That night, I left my parents' house and went to stay at her place. My family called me a bunch of times after that, asking if I was coming back, but I told them I would not step foot in that house as long as Benjamin was there. Since then, Benjamin went back to college, and who knows what awful kinds of stuff he's learning now. I've seen my parents a handful of times, but they still don't believe me. I still have no idea how to change their minds.
My name is Casey. I was raised in Kansas, and I love my parents very much, but I've always known that I was adopted. Even though I'd asked my adoptive parents many times, they refused to tell me any information about my biological family. They said it was best that I never found out where I came from. As soon as I turned 18, I went down to the city government building and put in an official request to unseal my adoption records. It took less than 10 minutes for the clerk to print out my file and hand it over. All my life, I'd waited to find out about my biological family, and I'd finally gotten the information I wanted. The record showed that my birth mother was named Leah. The birth father section had been left blank. I went home and got on my computer. Without telling my parents what I was doing, I got online and started searching for Leah. It took a while, but I eventually found an address. This was during the summer, right after I'd graduated high school. I went downstairs and told my parents that I was going to spend the day at my friend's house. They didn't suspect that I was going behind their backs. "No problem," my mom said. "Eat something first." She gave me a sandwich, made sure that I was wearing sunscreen for the day, and then sent me on my way. As I left, I started to feel really guilty over what I was doing. These were my real parents. They raised me, and they loved me more than anything. Biology didn't matter. But at the same time, I couldn't deny my curiosity. I needed to find answers. So I drove across town to my biological mom's address. She lived in a rundown trailer just outside the city. It was in a neighborhood I'd never visited before. Honestly, I didn't feel safe there. I knocked on the trailer's door. My birth record showed that she would have only been 34, but she looked much older. She must have had a really tough life. When I looked at her, though, I saw that her eyes looked a lot like mine. This was my birth mother. "Leah?" I asked. She seemed instantly suspicious. Whatever you're selling, I don't want any, she said. She started closing the door. Wait, I said. My name's Casey. I think I'm your daughter. Right away, her whole demeanor changed. Her face brightened into a big smile, showing that she was missing a few teeth. She burst forward and wrapped me in a big hug. Casey, she whispered. Come in, come in. She pulled me in. The inside of the trailer was even dirtier than the outside. There was a weird chemical smell in the air, and I wondered if she made some kind of inside. We sat on her torn, dusty sofa. She texted something on her phone, and then she started asking me about my life. I told her about all the sports I played in school. I said that I was planning to go to Kansas State on a volleyball scholarship. I told her about my boyfriend and my favorite movies and pretty much anything else I can think of. She seemed impressed. She said I had grown to a beautiful young woman and she was very happy for me. Then she got a sad look on her face and asked me about my adoptive parents. I answered her questions, but I didn't feel too comfortable telling her too much about them. This was about me and her. So I asked her about her job and any other family she had. She said she lived alone and didn't have any other kids. She was on welfare after getting fired from Dairy Queen, but she was optimistic about finding a new job soon. I appreciated how honest she was, so I decided to ask her the big question. Why did you give me up? She couldn't look me in the eyes. I assumed you knew, she said. Is it because you couldn't afford to have a kid? I asked. Of course not, she shouted. It was the first time her voice was anything but pleasant. If I'd had a normal child, I would have kept it. I am a religious woman. I had no idea what she meant by that. I was normal. And what did her religion have to do with anything? Why did you think I wasn't normal? I asked. She grabbed my wrist and twisted so that we could both see the palm of my hand. That was where I had a small burn scar from when I was a little kid. Leia stared at the scar. Oh my God, she said. They removed it. Then she looked me right in the eyes. You have no idea who you are, do you? I pulled my hand away from her. I was starting to think that I'd made a mistake in coming here. Casey, she said, you were born with a birthmark on the palm of your hand. It was in the shape of 3 6s. What? I gave you up for adoption because you're the Antichrist. I didn't have the heart to kill you, but now that you've returned... And that's when I noticed that 2 men had entered the room. I guess Leia had texted them right when I'd arrived. All this time we were talking, she was just distracting me, waiting for these men to come. They each had daggers. What happened next was a total blur. It was like I left my body completely. But what I do know is that I hit Leia right in the face and she fell onto the floor. Then I pushed those 2 men and raced out of there, jumped in my car and drove all the way back home. My parents were shocked to see me. Are you okay? Mom asked. I told them everything that Leia had said. Am I the devil? I asked. Both Mom and Dad burst out laughing. They came over and gave me a big hug. Oh, honey, Dad said. That burn mark was from when you accidentally picked up a hot coal when you were a baby. It was at a barbecue. Your birth mother is completely insane. Instant relief washed through my body. Thank God. It was all just the ravings of a mad woman. But the more I think about it, the more this doesn't make sense. How did she know about the burn on my hand? Who were those other men who came for me? I still don't have answers to those questions. I keep thinking about them. Am I really just a normal kid? Or are my adoptive parents lying to me?
I knew what was coming. Everyone in the car knew what was coming. And I had a sense that Andy, my 16-year-old younger brother, also knew, because he did not throw a tantrum the entire trip back from church. And Andy always threw a tantrum on our way back from church. Nothing troubled the stiff tranquility in the car, but for the occasional sigh that my father let out at unrhymed intervals. I was in trouble because I had kissed a boy in church. The car squealed when my father turned it into the street, and I felt my heart thump so furiously against my rib cage that I feared that if it beat any faster, there would be a gaping hole there in the stead. My mouth ran dry and parched, quicker by the second, as the car glided down the street to our own house. With the left swerve of his hand, Dad sharply cut the bend, and we were in the walkway. Worthless child. Better dead than bringing us shame. Mother said in a desperate breath. The soul that sins must die, my father said, and my blood ran cold. I felt turbulence brew in me so powerful that it made me shed a tear. I understood his words were no joke. He had done it before. He was revered in the neighborhood and had such powerful connections that had proven useful the last time. The last time it was my older brother. He was 19 just like me when it happened, but it still felt like a lifetime ago in my eyes. I recollected the details in broken pieces. He had been with a girl in church, and they had been caught in a compromising position. Father, Mother, Andy and I, and Tom had been in the car all the way home. Then, Father had said something of the sort. I went to my room on that occasion, and it was barely hours later that I heard Tom start to cry. He begged terribly in his crying. He begged for respite from Father's holy anger and Mother's righteous indifference. With each cry, I could sense his strength wane. I sniffed. Come with me, Andy, my mother said, and pushed her side of the door open. Andy's side of the car clicked open, and Mother moved over to seize him. I stared downwards at the car latch on my side of the car, and it was still shut. I blanched in horror. You must say your repentance. Your blood atones for the sins of your flesh, my father said, a stable tone that only betrayed anger. I suspected that he had said the same words to Tom before he handed him a sacrificial knife. The same knife which the people of the church he pastors over cut themselves with when they have been caught in sin or confession to sin, until he decrees their trespass forgiven by heaven. I had no desire to bleed. Tom had bled. He had slashed his flesh with the blade until he was leaking, but Father did not find forgiveness until Tom was gasping for breath. I sniffed back at the thought of such a strange consequence. No, I cried, and jumped out through the seat where Andy had sat. I ran after Mother into the house because it was the only sanctuary I could think of. I did not want to bear such an ugly ritual because I'd kissed a boy. I had heard girls my age kissing boys, and they did not have such violent marks of violent encounters to show for it. Mother appeared aghast when she saw me come from behind her, nudging her to the side as I rushed to my room. Father was on his heels behind me, carrying the knife. I wasn't thinking. I was simply living in horror, which I wanted to escape from. I found my phone on my bed, and I rushed to my room and picked it up. My father's yelling was loud from the door when I clicked on the emergency numbers. Mother soon joined in the frenzy, as passionate as he was, that I must bleed, if I should atone for my sins. I fumbled terribly from panic that I dialed the wrong numbers twice before I finally got it right. 911. My head struggled to interpret the commotion that my parents' footsteps were coming to my door with Andy beside them. I was not ready to hurt myself, not like Tom, who they had broken in their lust for righteousness. I remembered how Father had dispatched the semi-conscious Tom in a van, which was owned by one of his close friends. It was the last time I had seen Tom. He had simply laid a missing person report at the office, and the officers had been misdirected. When the soothing voice of a respondent came from over the phone, I was drawn into a brief silence that required calling to draw out of me. I started to speak into the phone. I told them my address in a quick, shallow breath, and heard from the respondent that police officers were on their way. I threw the phone on the bed and started to think of an escape route from my family. "Open the door, child. Accept your fate as it is," my father said, slinking the knife down the edge of the door to draw me out. The noise of the steel blade against the wood made my stomach sink. "Wretched child, a shame to virtue. Open up and feel the pain of your sins," my mother said. Father's patience ran thin. He lifted the knife and stabbed it through the door. The wood creaked. I was breathless with fear. "I will have to do it myself, since you are too cowardly," my father said, slipping into a frenzy. My skin was numb. I was so afraid that I started to go blind when my vision blurred out from the sheer force of blood pumping into my head. My lips quivered and my limbs trembled. I watched from inside the room as father broke down the door. Mother had words, and she praised his strength, riling his devoted rally for the Lord. He saw me. I saw him. But he looked nothing like my father. His eyes were heavy and red. He appeared manic. Mother also had become the crazed version of herself, all of the exertion on the door. Father gripped the hilt of the knife tighter. I heard the shrill cries of sirens in the distance, and I took it as cue for my escape. I turned to my room's window and jumped through the gap in a daze. I ran as quickly as my feet could carry me when I saw the cops and ran to them with father and mother behind me. "Put your hands up," the cops said to me, and then to mother and father when they stopped in our driveway. "Sarah?" the cops called. I answered that it was me. They then turned to my parents. The knife fell out of my father's hand. "You're both under arrest for attempted murder," the cops said to my parents.